Hey everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel for another Simon Hurley Create video. Today I'm going to be making a couple of Christmas cards, and we're going to be focusing on this stamp set called Posh Poinsettas. It's a great two-step stamp, and I think that it would make for some fairly easy, and you could probably mass produce some pretty good cards with this one. We're also going to be using another stamp. This is a little bit older, but it's a background stamp that I feel like is a must. It's like a staple background, and this one's called Painted Lines. And so we're just going to go ahead and use that on our background. My thought process on this, and yes, we're making slimline, I know you're surprised. My thought process on this one was to use that painted lines to make kind of like shutters. I know they're uneven lines, but I think that looks really cool for a background because we're going to put our poinsettas and our wreath up on there and make it look like it's on like the siding of a house. So I've got this inside of my gigantic Misti. This is a scrapbook Misti. And I'm going to ink up my stamp using some Woof ink. And it's just a really nice, almost like a grayish color. And so I'm stamping that down, and for whatever reason, I was on the struggle bus with getting the stamp to actually do well on that right-hand side. And I think it had everything to do with the fact that I had it way too close to the side of the Misti. So we're also going to flip this now. And then we're just going to kind of try and line up that stamp because we want that to be continuous across the whole background. And once I'm happy with how that's lined up, we'll ink that up one more time, and then we'll stamp that down. And once again, struggling with that right-hand side, but I end up just by stamping it a couple more times, I'm able to get that all filled in. So note to the wise here, don't have it brushed up so closely to the edge of your Misti or your stamp positioner. Now I'm bringing in a small little brush, and we're going to do some ink blending on the edges of our card. I love the look of doing this. I feel like it just kind of softens those edges a little bit so it's not so stark white. And speaking of stark white, we're actually using the Stark White Cardstock by Simon Hurley. And I'm going to do this on both backgrounds. So as I said, we're making 2 Christmas cards. And I'm going to bring in some more of that Stark White Cardstock and put it into my regular size Misti. And we're going to bring in the outlines of our wreath and our poinsettia. My plan is to stamp out the poinsettia a few times. I'm going to do 2 of them, and then I'm going to bring in the card base, and we'll do it inside the card base. I wish I had stamped 2 of the wreaths so that I could put one on the inside as well, but I didn't. All right, so stamping the outside first, or the outline, and I'm using some Memento Tuxedo black ink because for the wreath there is only one part of that stamp. It's just the greenery, and so I do want to do some alcohol marker coloring on the poinsettias themselves and the berries and the pine cones. So I'll pull out the wreath because I'm done with that, but I am going to leave the poinsettia in because I'm going to flip my paper and I'm going to stamp it again. So we'll just ink it up again, and I'm stamping it twice just to make sure that I have a nice crisp black image. So again, we'll stamp it one more time. And then this is where I decide to bring in the base. Now, a base for a slimline, at least the ones that I make, I cut that paper to be 7 inches by 8.5 inches, and it's going to fit inside of my Misti just perfectly, even closing the door. Now, this is the old Misti. There's a new one out. I'm not sure if it would work the same in that one. My guess is that it would, but this is the older Misti. And so we're stamping it just on the inside. I've already scored that baby down at 3.5 inches. And so this is just the inside of my card. And then we can clean that off and pull that out, and now we can move on to the second part of the stamping. So I'm going to grab the actual poinsettia, line that up, which is super simple, close the door of the Misti, and I'm going to grab 2 colors. We're going to grab Bee Sting, and we're going to grab Game Over. Game Over is a new color. Bee Sting is just a nice bright red. It's super pretty. So I'm going to stamp that a couple times just because I didn't do the best job stamping the first time. So we'll ink that up one more time with that Bee Sting, and then we'll stamp that down again. We're going to use kind of an older technique called rock and roll, and this is where the darker color comes in. This is where Game Over comes in. I am just kind of stamping that only on the edges of the poinsettia, and then I'll stamp that down, and you'll be left with like the lighter color in the center, which is the Bee Sting, and then you'll have your Game Over on the edges. It's really a very fun technique to do, and it just adds such a dimension to the stamp that you can't just get just by stamping with one color. So now we're going to clean up our mess with the poinsettia itself, and then we'll bring in the leaves. We will just line those up over the top of the leaves that are there. And these are two separate stamps that you have. So we'll line those up, and we're going to do that rock and roll technique once again. Our first color that we're going to use is Later Gator. So I'll ink that up with the Later Gator. And we're going to use Fake Plant as our rock and roll. And as I was saying, you just want to ink up the edges when you do that. But I'm going to stamp Later Gator just the one time. And I'm not cleaning off my stamp in between just because we're in the green family, so it really doesn't bother me. And most of the ink will come off anyway. And so, yeah. Isn't that cool? It just adds this nice little dimension to it. So now that we have, because we left everything where it was, we can easily bring in our stamped images and we can just continue on like we were. Later Gator, then the edges is Fake Plant. And then we'll flip our poinsettias and do it again. Later Gator, edges, Fake Plant. And I just love how it turns out. It's just so cool. It takes hardly any effort. And then you have these really pretty dimensional poinsettias. And as I said, for the wreath, because we're going to clean off our leaves and put those away, our wreath only has, the second stamp is just the greenery, which is, I think, the perfect piece to have. So I'll line that up, and it's actually really easy to line up. Close the door of the Misti, and then we'll do the same process. I'm going to ink this up with Fake Plant, or Later Gator. And I didn't do a very good job of inking it up the first time, as you can tell, so I'm going to ink it up again. And then we'll come in with that Fake Plant on the edges. And it does look like, if you just look at it this way, that I'm getting the entire stamp, but I am just tilting that ink pad and just getting the edges. And I want a little bit more differentiation at the top, so I'm going to do that a couple times. But I love how that looks. It's just cool. And then I can clean up my mess. And then we can color the rest of the images that are on the wreath. And I'll pull in some R37 is this first color that I'm using. And I'm just slapping that color down. I'm going to do that over all the poinsettias. And then I have some R29, which is a little bit darker. And I'm going to bring that in for the centers, basically, of each of the leaves. So where they're behind on each of the petals, I'll put some of that darker color down just to add a little bit of dimension there too. You could leave it flat if you wanted, but I like adding a little bit of dimension. And so I'll do that on all the poinsettias. And the rest of the images in this set, or on this stamp itself, are fairly small, so you wouldn't have to go too crazy with detailed colors or, you know, doing more than one color. So I'll bring in some B16 for all the berries, and basically I'm just dotting those. And I miss one, and I also use it on the sprigs as well, but I miss one set of berries, so I will bring it back in later. But yeah, it's very subtle, and I love the blue, this bright blue, with the, you know, the red and the green. I think it's pretty. And then I'll bring in some E25 for the pine cones. And then we're going to do some fussy cutting. I know that's making some of you cringe, but these are easy enough images to fussy cut. I am leaving a little bit of a white border around all of my images. And if you were mass producing, you obviously, you know, wouldn't have to do this if you didn't want to. I know there are cut files for these. I don't really know how to use those. I do have a Cricut, but I've honestly just never taken the time to do it because I don't mind fussy cutting. But if that is something that concerns you, you can look those up. And the wreath itself is super easy to fussy cut. You could make it even easier than what I do by just cutting out the outside, but I go a step further and I'm going to cut out the inside of that wreath just for a little bit extra, and I'll show you how easy that is as well. Once we get our wreath cut out, you're going to poke a hole in the top, from the top into the middle, and then you're going to come in from the bottom. So you'll bring your scissors in, just the upper portion of your scissors through the bottom, and then you can cut out your border that way. Super simple to do and really not a lot of effort. All right, now we want to stamp our sentiments. So I just have some black cardstock from my stash, and I'm going to put this into my mini Misti. Now you've seen all the Mistis I have. And I'm going to use a magic powder bag over the top of that, brush away the excess. Don't worry about the film, or the residue that's left behind by that magic powder bag. We'll get rid of it. But I use that so that I don't have embossing powder sticking to places I don't want it to. I'm going to stamp that down with an embossing ink which is just a clear sticky ink, and then I'll cover that with some embossing powder, some white detail embossing powder, and then we're going to heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And if you do find that you have powder in places you don't want it, before you heat set, just use like a dry paint brush to wipe away any of the excess. All right, now that that's taken care of, I'm going to wipe away that residue just using a microfiber cloth. And then I'm going to stick this into my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer to trim off all of the excess paper that I have. And I'm using the clear guide to line everything up. Just lining up at the bottom of each of the sentiments. It makes it super simple this way. That one I'm going to leave nice and long. Or no, not that one. It's the other one I'm leaving nice and long. This one I do cut a bit of a slanted banner on that. And I'm going to use some foam tape on the back of all of my images and my sentiments. Just lining all that up, trimming off you know, what I don't need. And you'll notice that I do have a little cardinal there. I went ahead and stamped that and cut and colored it outside of filming. I felt like the poinsettia card just needed a little something extra. So now I'll peel off all of the excess, or not all the excess, all of the release paper on my poinsettias using my Tim Holtz pick. And then we'll slap down our little poinsettias. And then we'll do the same thing with our sentiment, peel off the release paper on that, line it up on our glass mat, and then we can put down our sentiment nice and straight. And then I'll also peel off the release paper on my cardinal, and he can sit on top of the sentiment. So now we have 3 little images, which is what I was going for. And then I'll trim off all the excess. You'll notice, obviously, I had a mishap of stamping on the back of this panel. But that's the beautiful thing about paper, is you can flip it over and try again. So now I'm going to adhere this down to my panel. This is the panel or the card base that has the poinsettia on the inside, and that's going to take up the full front of that slimline card. Closed, that measures 3.5 inches by 8.5 inches. And we're going to do the same thing over here on this panel, just peel off all the release paper on our wreath. And we're going to tack that down sort of to the middle upper portion of this card. And I feel like this one really does look like it's on the side of a house. And then our sentiment, I left that nice and long. I'm just going to center that up and use the glass mat as well to make sure that that's straight. We'll flip that over and we'll trim off all the excess of that as well. And then we're going to pull in our card base. And I don't have this one scored yet, so I'll show you how I do that. I just use a score buddy. And I score this at 3.5 inches because this was cut 7 inches by 8.5 inches. So then you would score it at 3.5 inches. And then that's all ready to go. So I'll adhere this down to the front of that card base using some liquid glue. But I can't stop there. I do need to add a little bit of something. So I have some bright gold crystal drops. I'm going to put that on the centers of all of my poinsettias, just in tiny little drops. That way it, you know, I've got that gold coming back from the centers. Just an easy way to do that. And then I'm also going to bring in some Night Sky Glitter Drops by Nuvo. Those will dry clear, and then they'll have a little bit of a blue tint, so it'll bring those berries in that were on the wreath. I'll put 3 there. I'm just dotting it, being pretty liberal on this one. And then on the other one, I'll put 3 on the upper portion. And I'll end up putting 5 on that bottom portion just because it was a little bit top heavy, so I added a few more to the bottom. And then I'll tap those down to make them look a little bit more like enamel dots. And that's going to finish off our 2 Christmas cards. So here we are. We only have so many weeks until Christmas. My encouragement to you is to get started on those Christmas cards, and I hope this will inspire you to do so. So if you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, I will see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.